All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard broadcast webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I am so excited for this webinar. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our speakers or for all of them, please just go ahead and use the question and answer tab on your interface and submit them. We are going to be taking questions throughout the webinar. So please don't wait until a question and answer session at the end, because there won't be one. We're going to have all the questions kind of come through during the webinar. We also have a very, very interactive public chat on the interface here. So we encourage everybody in the audience to please speak up and be a part of the conversation. Feel free to chat us your comments, questions, suggestions, whatever you want to chat over to us. We will take a look at during the webinar, and hopefully go ahead and get some of those comments integrated into the conversation as well. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is application security, moving at the speed of DevOps. I have 4 very distinguished and very smart people on my panel discussion today. I'd like to introduce all 4 of them now. First up, we have Reese Arkins, who is the Director of Product Management at WhiteSource. Reese, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Charlene. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Next up, we have Eitan Worzel, who is the HCL AppScan Head of Product at HCL Software. Eitan, as always, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me, Charlene.
Great.
Hi, everyone.
Great. Next up, we have Scott Gerlach, who is the Chief Security Officer at StackHawk. Hey, Scott, thanks so much for joining me. I think this is our first webinar together, right?
I think so, yeah. This is not my first. It's not my first one with this crew, but with, these panelists, yes. And I'm super happy to be here.
All right, great. And last but certainly not least, we have Robbie Myra, who is the Head of Product and Partner Marketing at Snyk. Robbie, thank you also for joining today's panel discussion. And I do believe that this is our first webinar as well.
That's right, Charlene.
All right, great. Well, welcome to all 4 of you. I'm very excited about this discussion. As I said before, this is about application security moving at the speed of DevOps. And it is actually the topic spotlight for Security Boulevard for the month of April. So I encourage everybody, if you're into application security, you want to learn more, you can always go over to securityboulevard.com, check out all of the articles that we have that are related to application security on the site. We have a ton of information on there, but definitely want to kind of drill down a little bit, bring the topic home to these 4 esteemed panelists that I have. I'm actually going to take this little title slide off the interface here so that we can see everybody's faces. Hi, everybody. Now we can see everybody. As I said before, this is our topic spotlight for April, and it is so very timely. If you think about all of the recent high-profile software supply chain attacks that we've been hearing about, SolarWinds probably is the most prevalent or the most well-known. We've had a lot more focus on application security, but at the same time, I've got some interesting statistics for you. We've got a security of 480 IT security decision makers that Forrester Research just recently published. Takes a look at application security, kind of what organizations are doing about application security. Only about 28% of the respondents said that they are making application security improvements a top tactical priority over the next 12 months. that to me kind of blows my mind, because it shows that in so many organizations, security is still very much taking kind of a backseat role, and it's not really being integrated into the application development kind of tool chain, the DevOps tool chain, if you will. And so it really, to me, kind of underscores the fact that we need to really approach application security from a better angle. And so these four gentlemen today hopefully will kind of help lead the way, if you will. But I do want to throw the first question out to you guys, which is, when we think about that 28% who are, that's obviously just less than a quarter, or a little more than a quarter, they're the only ones who are making application security a real tactical priority, those improvements over the next year or so. So why do you suppose we're not getting the uptake with security and application security that we should be? I mean, is it a question of responsibility, like who's responsible? And Reese, I want to throw it out to you first of all. Whose responsibility is it for application security?
Thanks, Charlene. I mean, it depends on the type of organization, of course. So dedicated software organizations, it's pretty much everybody's responsibility, therefore right up to the very top. Other companies where software is something that they do a lot of, but it's not their core business, they often fall the shortest because they're not really thinking how critical it is. There's not someone easily identified that is the sole responsibility of them. So that's often where it falls the shortest. And just one thing I'd add is that there's a great saying, which is the enemy always gets a vote. And you can have 28% of people, which we'll say 72% of people saying, I'm not going to make it a top priority, but their enemy gets a vote. And the enemies have been very active lately. So I don't think they'll have much of a choice in the long run.
Robbie, what about you? What do you think? Whose responsibility is it for security? Application security.
Clearly, it's everyone's responsibility. But and I think Reese was on a good point, both for technology companies as well as I think every company today is competing in some way on technology, right? And that's the story of digital transformation. And one of the challenges, I think, is that in some companies, in mature, let's say, DevOps companies, I think security is starting to realize that they got a little bit left behind when Dev and Ops got together and they're off on the side, but they're getting involved. And they're realizing that when they get involved, actually it makes it everybody's responsibility, right? The developers are actually the ones who should be starting, and the application security team or roles have to evolve from the person who secures everything to the person who's guiding the developers through the process and who's still governing the process, but it's a different type of role. And I don't know if that impacted the answer between the 28% or the 72%. But that may be a part of it. Is the ownership and even the model of what is application security, I think, is changing in a way that kind of throws ownership up for grabs a little bit.
So I want to come back to that. The ownership is changing. That's a great point of discussion. But Scott, when you're talking to your customers and you're having the security conversation, who are you speaking with? Are you talking to the developers? Are you talking to the security personnel, or are you talking to both sides?
Yeah, totally. Most of the people that are coming to StackHawk it's about a 50-50 split. And I think a lot of that number that you're asking about there is indicative of kind of the way that application security used to work and that barrier to entry. Like, I don't even have a security team. I can't do that because of a lot of things that we've done in the past around how product is marketed and available and spoken to and the language they use and all those kind of things. So, we see smaller dev teams with no security team coming and going, hey, we want to get ahead of this. And then we see security teams coming in and going, hey, we're trying to rethink how we make this work because we don't want to be blockers and we don't want to chase stuff down in prod anymore. So there's a lot of that stuff going on too.
So, Eitan, do you think that as more organizations adopt DevOps and then DevSecOps, Do you think that there will be less of this? Because one of the things that I've noticed is these, sometimes these application security questions or issues that are arising from organizations that don't necessarily have DevOps right now, and they're not necessarily practicing it. So there is this kind of bifurcation between application development and security. And so do you think that, the organizations that have adopted DevOps and have that natural progression toward DevSecOps, do you think that's less of a conversation within the organization, or do you think that they're still kind of grappling with, even though they have DevSecOps, how does security actually fit into the conversation?
Well, I'll start with I wish. I don't think that companies that went to DevOps, and most companies just say they moved to DevOps and they're not really, or they're in steps. There is a reason why people say DevSecOps now, although it should have been part of DevOps. People don't think of security still as part of their job. Just wanted to add to the question earlier. I love the phrase "it takes a village," because it takes a village to do security. Everyone needs to be part of it. But I'm maybe in minority opinion here. I don't think that the responsibility is for everyone. Someone needs to be responsible. Someone needs, and that's in Scott in this case, because security is responsible. They need to work with developers. They need to guide them. They need to show them the way. But at the end, it's they're on the line, and they're responsible. So yes, as people move to DevOps, it should be easier with the tools that we and others are giving them, and Snake and White Source, all of us, but they need to want to do that. And yes,
I think there can be a nuance between leadership and responsibility. So sometimes I think we probably all mostly agree on it. Like if you think of health and safety and retail, that has to be everybody's responsibility. That doesn't mean you have no one in charge of health and safety in the company. So it's similar like that. You need to make everyone aware that to be secure, we all have to have joint responsibility. But leadership, I think, is then maybe separate, and that's what leads.
Or maybe it's accountability, or maybe there's a different word. Like I think you have to share responsibility throughout. I work with too many customers who have, literally a handful of application security folks and hundreds to thousands of developers. So you have to change the way that you're doing it, that you're doing security, and you're pushing some of the responsibility, just like ops did, as you said in DevOps, right? It became a shared, who's responsible for ops or uptime in that the answer is it's shared, right? But there might be someone who's more accountable for making sure that the process is being followed and governed, and maybe they are a little bit more, as you say, on the line if something happens. And so maybe it's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility, but yes, someone is leading the effort.
Well, you used an interesting word. You used accountability, and that actually is something that I wanted to bring up because I have some more statistics for you guys. And Reese, you guys just recently did a survey of some IT and security practitioners, and you guys found that 3/4 of organizations report that their applications portfolio has become more vulnerable to attacks over the past year. And then at the same time, we've got another survey that was done by Enterprise Strategy Group that found that it was done on behalf of, they found that nearly half of respondents admit they consciously push code with known vulnerabilities into production so that they can meet their application's deadline. So they're praying to two gods there. They're meeting their deadlines, but they recognize that security is important. But, at the end of the day, are they going to get pinged on the fact that their code is late because it's more secure? Or are they going to, everybody recognizes when code is late, but nobody, maybe few people recognize that code is insecure when it gets pushed to production. So, does this then become a question of accountability? Should these developers recognize that, geez, my code it's not really ready, but I can't miss my deadline? So how do you kind of deal with that? And Robbie, I want to come back to you since you did bring up that word of accountability. Is that valid? Is that part of the conversation? I mean, and how do we address that?
I mean, I think it's a valid point to bring up. I think if you look at the personal level, if you take accountability away for a second, right, and you look at the personal level, I don't think any developer wants to push a vulnerable application on purpose. And I don't think any security person that I've ever worked with wanted to slow down their company, right? So while one is organizationally accountable, if you look at job descriptions for application security folks or any security folks, it says something like, come in and make sure we don't get hacked, if you really read through it, right? And if you look at developers, it generally says something like you're going to deliver on time and fast and keep us competitive. And those are your two pressures in the business. But that's where if you can get to that shared responsibility where you're trying to optimize for both, you can't only err one or the other, right? If you only err on security, like maybe you'll never get hacked, but you become Blockbuster and you got a business, right? If you err on the side of going fast, then you leave too many holes open and you're Equifax, right, or something like that. So neither one's a win if you go to the extremes. You've got to find a balance, and to do that, you've got to bring these two groups together who, in my experience, aren't at odds with each other that often. Like, they want to work together, they just don't have the organizational process or the tools that enable them to do that. But that's where this has to go to.
People respond to incentives, and when you think of delivering an application late, there's pretty much 100% chance that someone is going to remind you that you delivered the application late. If you push code which has some vulnerabilities still in it, there might only be a 1% or less chance that it's going to blow back on you, and so people go for the easier option. So software development organizations need to make sure that people are incentivized correctly as well, where they're not just measured on deliverables and on time and so on.
And
that's a great point.
And I think that if we're a true DevOps shop that does continuous deployment, not just continuous delivery, releasing something with known vulnerability isn't the end of the world. They can fix it the day after or the day after that. As long as they can work to mitigate things fast, that's okay. I mean, 2 years ago, I heard someone saying, us in the security panel, and I was shocked. But it makes a lot of sense. If you can fix it the day after, so hackers are not that fast. They need to find the vulnerabilities and then to exploit it. So, but in most cases, I guess in the survey that they did with White Source, people knew that they are releasing vulnerabilities into production and not fixing it fast enough. So that's the concern.
Yeah. Well, so with that in mind, though, what's an acceptable level of vulnerabilities that you can release, and what's an acceptable time frame to get those vulnerabilities fixed?
I'll let the CISO answer that one.
Hey.
Yeah.
To me, I think it's hilarious that we talk about this thing like there's one person that's involved in making all these decisions, whether it's the singular developer that's obviously doesn't want to push out crappy code, but maybe can't know if there are also security vulnerabilities in their code that they're writing, versus the product team that's involved with that as well, meeting delivery guidelines and being able to go, hey, there's a security problem in this code, whether that's something we wrote or something we included or whatever that is. What should we do, product? And having that conversation, and whether or not you have a security team who is ultimately responsible, that it's all a conversation around how that goes, and facilitating that conversation is really, really the hardest part of this whole thing, versus, just being, because right now people are making unconscious decisions, right? I'm pretty sure it's good. There's no way for me to know. Out to product goes. Maybe we'll find something. Versus a conscious decision of, there's a problem here, but we have a guideline or a deadline to meet. So let's push it, and then let's fast follow with the fix on the security thing. Those kinds of conversations happen if you can know that you're making those kinds of mistakes. And that's kind of hard, was really hard before. It's getting easier now with better tooling and processes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And of course, it depends on the application, right? There are no two applications the same. So what is the business to my business? What is the risk to my business if this application is breached? Is the number one thing that I should concern about. If it's a marketing side that tells a little bit about my product and there's a hack there, it will be embarrassing, but it's not going to be really bad. At the same time, if there is a SQL injection in something that collects my customer information and someone can dump all my customers, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, prioritization is a really big key here. Like detection in many ways is cheap. Prioritization and remediation are, what's the most valuable. And there's also like a very big difference between, in terms of prioritizing between, not only just the example of an internal app, but say if there's a mistake like that your SAST has identified, where in a race condition someone could potentially do something, if they somehow found that out, versus if more like the Equifax model where someone can easily tell what version of the web server you're using and they know which versions are vulnerable. So basically, if you're out there, you're just a sitting duck. There's a very big difference between those types of scenarios, even if you considered both of them to be like high severity. So prioritization is really key.
No, that's a good point. We've gotten some really great comments in from the audience so far. We got a question or actually a comment from Scott, who said that I agree that for flaws found in my code, that threat actors might take some time to discover it. But for third-party flaws, such as open source, that have known exploits and attacks, I think that timeline is much more compressed. So, Reese, I know, your organization is all about open source security. So what do you have to say in regards to what Scott said about
as Ravi said in the chat, it's a great point. When I talk about what I find exciting about open source security, it's the fact that it is very different from many others, because in typical security you can have a goal of like 0, where secrets and things like that, you don't want them to ever get into production, right? So you can set yourself a goal and say, what did we do wrong to achieve it? In open source security, you're going to be too hard on yourself if you say we want 0 vulnerabilities in our production ever, because they get discovered and you're already using them. So the fact that they become public and disclosed and then the clock starts is something quite unique in the open source security, like Scott pointed out, because the enemy gets a vote and it's public. You can't make them unpublic. You can choose to ignore it, but they're still out there and the others know about them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We also have an interesting comment from Sylvain, who says a developer cannot be accountable for all vulnerabilities introduced in an application. Some of the vulnerabilities happen only because you have assembled components that together create the vulnerability. So it is definitely a team job and need activities at multiple steps along the pipeline. I agree with that. And I also wonder if the source code vulnerabilities are becoming a major issue with a lot of organizations as it pertains to application security. What are we doing to make sure that our source code is secure and that it is updated on a regular basis? And Scott, I'm going to throw this over to you to kind of address the idea of source code vulnerabilities and componentizing. Making sure all the components are secure. So, what do you think about this idea of the components? I mean, how big of an issue is this?
Yeah, I think this is, obviously this is a bigger and bigger issue as you use more and more components to go faster, right? So instead of building all the functions that your app or whatever it is could need, people have done that a lot. And, those are really good things to help you go faster. Again, how do you know whether or not those things have problems? I think a developer can be responsible for this and potentially accountable as long as they can know. Once again, knowing is the hardest part of this whole thing, because they also are the only ones that can fix it by upgrading a library and then doing the functional tests to make sure it wasn't a breaking change or functionality that you're using has changed. But the same thing happens for the code that they write that wraps all those things, right? You got to be able to know that there's not a problem in those code bases, that you haven't written some SQL function the wrong way or in an insecure way, or unsafely set inner DOM, HTML, React function, those kinds of things. But again, developers are the ones, there's a few organizations out there that have really good security teams that are participating in code, like writing code, but there's not that many. And the people that can fix this stuff can often fix it like while they're writing, if they can know at that point, instead of like sending it off into black boxes or sending it out into prod and hoping some other tooling finds it. If they can know while they're in their IDE or while they're running unit tests, that kind of stuff, and in CI/CD, more often than not, when we talk to developers, we say, hey, okay, cool. What would you do now that you know about this thing? Almost all the time they go, fix it, because I don't want to put out crappy code.
Right. Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that they, actually want to do the right thing. So, it seems to me that we've been hearing a lot more headlines or reading a lot more headlines these days about, vulnerabilities in source code. And a lot of times it's just the fact that vulnerabilities have been found and they've been exposed by hackers and taken advantage of, if you will. But the source code doesn't actually get updated. So the next time the source code is used, it's got the same vulnerabilities in it. And so do you think that organizations are doing enough to make sure that the code that they are using over and over is being updated accordingly, and that all of those vulnerabilities that are discovered are properly addressed? I'll let anybody answer that who wants to.
Ooh.
I think the situation today is much better, and a lot thanks to companies like Whitesource and Snyk and BlockDuck and others that make open source vulnerability the top, right? Even vendors that offer more than open source, they always say, if you have an open source vulnerability, treat that as a top priority because it's easier to detect. I mean, sometimes you just throw a wide net in the internet and find those web applications that are using a vulnerable library, and you know what to do with them. So that's the first thing. Whether companies are quick to update them, whether they're using the auto patch mechanism that some of the vendors have, probably not as much, but yeah, it's way better than in the past. At the same time, the other side is much faster. So it's chase.
Yeah, both other sides are faster, right? The hacker side and just the pressure to get more out side is faster. But I agree. I mean, I do think people are making, generally there's progress in that, both in what people are actually doing and even just the way that it's spoken about. When you look at some of the analyst reports on application security now, SCA, which it enables you to find the open source things that Recent and I do, is now part of that conversation. There was a while where it was sort of this little add-on at the bottom right after you got through SAST and DAST and others there, and now it's in the conversation. There's other things that are coming up in the conversation as well, as kind of the scope of what an application evolves. But I think that's a good sign of progress as well, just that it's in the discussion.
Yeah, one of the things we do is a component. Oh, sorry, Ethan. One of the things we do in this area is a component-based approach as well. So, I mean, superficially, you can say it's fixed in version 1.4.0, but it can be important to understand like which files were part of the fix so that you can detect if it accidentally gets reverted, added back to a future version or backported by accident, things like that. So that's an important like automated step for reducing repeat mistakes. And I think it's also good for shout out to GitHub SEML in this as well. Like traditional SAST has had a lot of false positives, but they went for a very low false positive rate with the goal that once you've caught a mistake, you don't make it again. And that's also a nice way to prevent that repeat error in proprietary code.
And as much as SCA went into mainstream really, really fast, I think it's the fastest in the Gartner hype cycle that went to mainstream. We need to remember that it's not that easy as we are trying to paint it. I mean, it's not that, okay, I included this library, now I'll include this library. It's not, because as Scott mentioned earlier, it can break my build. And in many cases, I'm not impacted by it. I still think that one needs to update their library to the latest version, even if they're not really impacted by that vulnerability, because someone else later, another developer, may add code. But let's be fair, it's not as easy as a line of code.
Sure.
Often enough.
Yeah, totally. Tomas from Snyk and I did a really cool webinar last month that was all about trying to help sort this stuff out. So talking about where IAST and DAST and SCA kind of all combined to go, hey, you've included this vulnerable library in your code. And then we ran a DAST scan against it, and the IAST agent inside of it went, yeah, and it's accessible via outside. that's a really good kind of whole story of not only have you included it, but it's affecting your application because it is accessible from outside. So now you need to do something with that stuff. So it is hard, as Itan said, to understand what all of that looks like. But I think the tooling is getting really close to being able to intelligently go, you have a vulnerable component, it is accessible from outside, and the upgrade is this version. The next part of that is it going to break my stuff when I upgrade it?
That's a good point, though. I mean, because, if it does break, then, obviously you're kind of back to square one, because there's going to be some vulnerabilities that are introduced there as well. So let's talk testing a little bit. Where are we kind of on the application security testing, the pipeline or the timeline or the evolution of testing? Because, I mean, we have a number of different types of tests that obviously test different things within the code, but do you think we're ever going to get to a point where we have kind of one testing to rule them all when it comes to application security? Because is it possible that with the sheer number of tools that we're using right now, that we're actually kind of skipping some things or missing some things because of that?
Yes.
Okay, moving on. So,
yeah, next question.
Yeah. So tell me why, Itan.
I'll start with the end. Yes, because tools and all of us, I'm sure on this knows DAS, SAS, IAS, SCA, we can't detect. I'm losing words in English here. I apologize for that. We can't detect backdoors, for example, right? There is no replacement for the actual pen tester that does the business logic testing. We can't. There are things that you cannot do automatically. As for, is there one technology to rule them all? No, that's the opposite of the beginning, because there are things that DAS is really good at. There are things that SAS, each one of them has their sweet spot. Each one of them has issue types that they're better in detection. But more important, I find, is that each one of them has different use case. So earlier, I mean, SCA is the first thing that people should start with. They can do it on the first line of code that they write. And then it's perfect for the IDE, for the integration with GitHub, for all those places. DAST, as someone that came from DAST from 2007, no, it's not in the IDE, let's face it. But it's very good later at the point where you have something that you can deploy, especially with DevOps, where you can test it in testing environment, and it will be exactly the same as in production, so you can verify everything. We are actually doing a really interesting correlation project on our side to see what each technology can find, and if they are the same. There are some correlation, but it's not all of it. So I'm sorry, audience, if you were hoping to hear from us, hey, is this fun? No. The right use case if you want to get the best value of it.
So you could do it, or you could do it well. So
I mean, there's two different ways of looking at it, right? So if we talk about COVID approaches, they say the Swiss cheese approach, where no method itself solves everything. Like washing hands, keeping distance, wearing a mask. But if you line up enough slices of that holy cheese, eventually you kind of manage to block nearly everything. And the various tools can be a little bit like that as well, where none of them are perfect, but if you line up enough of them, you catch the majority. On the devil's advocate side, no one has unlimited time. So there is a natural, competition between the various tools as to which provides the best, bang for buck, where buck is maybe time rather than money. And so, whichever tools continue to be able to have the best level of, lowest level of false positives, I think is also going to be one of the big factors.
Or what works well where in the process, right? So I think it's a good point. And the slices, what does work well in the IDE, what does work well in Git, what does work well in pipeline, what gives you your most bang from your buck early on in being able to find and remove things early on while you can, and what won't be found until the end and needs to be, as you said, Reese, earlier, prioritized against everything else. And I agree with that point too, which is because there's all these slices, you're going to get all these different things to work on coming out of it, and you've got to be able to effectively prioritize.
Yeah. Actually, Ravi, sorry, just you reminded me of one thing, and that is that there's also a very clear way of looking at it as well, which is which tools are fast enough to run in the IDE, like to run in essential real time. Then you've got the next category, which is which is what can be run in CI, like what doesn't slow you down too much in CI. And then there is the final one, which tools which are valuable but too slow to run basically as a regular continuous approach. And I think if you draw those lines, then it's also it's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Well, and how old is it too, right? If you're throwing something at legacy code versus you're throwing something at a new project that's being developed, then obviously that's another element of the timeline as to what would be more effective.
And to that point, while it's sexy to talk about DevOps, as I said earlier, probably 80% of the applications, if not more, are not DevOps. Those groups are not using DevOps. In fact, probably more than 50% of the code in financial sectors and insurance is COBOL. So we can't forget that we need to protect them also, and we need to find the tools to make sure that we as customers, as their users, our information is protected also.
Right.
So it's all about use case and tool and the right time and the right experience, all of it.
Yeah, and as there are APIs and other hooks that kind of come out to kind of port some of that that COBOL code or the system of record over into these more kind of fintech applications that are using some of those that data. We've got to be able to secure that data as it's in transit as well. That may be a whole other conversation, but maybe the question of API security is one worth checking out as well. Whether that's going to actually kind of break the stuff, if you will, Scott, by having having that API that's kind of attached to the code that. That's another kind of software supply chain or third-party, application security risk there. But we've gotten some great comments in, and I want to address a couple of them. First of all, Rob said that it sounds like a new favorite party game. How many words can you make from IaaS, DAS to SCA? Bonus edition includes SAST and RASP. So we've got that going for us. But then Scott actually asked, any thoughts on FAST, which is feedback-based application security testing? Because he said it seems to be an evolution of DAST. So I don't know, Scott, you kind of shook your head there. So maybe I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Someone sprung this on me just a couple of weeks ago. They're like, what do you think about FAST? I'm like, sounds awesome. I don't know what it is. So then I went on a mission to figure it out. FAST is super cool, but it's super code nerdy. In my opinion, it's very like, okay, I'm going to build a fuzzing test against these routes in my API. And it's really good at going, I found a problem and it's right here in this code. But the setup today, to me, the setup is really heavy. So it takes a long time to get to the point where you're going, click, run all the things, and tell me about it. It has potential to be really cool, I think, but to me, it's a really heavy setup tool right now.
Okay, so maybe we're early days there.
Yeah, Scott, I was trying to read about it, and basically it's fuzzing, but how do you cover all the payloads that the potential hacker can do, like what DAST is trying to do? Yeah, so the cool thing is it hooks into code, so it knows what kind of stuff the code is, as opposed to traditional fuzzing, which is throw as much stuff against the wall to see what happens. This one is more hooked into code, so it knows what code processes and routines the code is actually trying to do, and looking for some of that business logic trigger, like if you've got a username hard-coded into code looking for admin names, it can see that and try to throw stuff at that. So it's a little bit different in that, and that's why I say it has potential to be really cool. It's just so heavy right now.
Yeah, it's almost like that kids game, right? Like getting warmer, colder, colder. It stops when it can't get any further, but when it's making progress, it keeps going. With the idea being that it can get to a greater level of code coverage than, like Scott said, the black box DAS, just throw everything at it and and see how it goes.
Very cool. Very cool. So Aaron says there has to be blueprinting, tooling, landscape for various type of applications, starting from web, mobile to cloud services. And so I think that's kind of the in the kind of the maybe the testing journey, but obviously the application security journey as a whole. And it does kind of bring up the thought that some maybe actually hadn't thought about bringing up, but definitely it's worth checking out or discussing. When we're talking about application security and testing between these different devices, these different platforms, are there different testing considerations? Like if you're doing mobile testing versus cloud services testing, things of that nature. I mean, is that even a consideration? Reese?
I was going to say I'll answer a slightly different question, but testing between the barriers between like microservices, for example, is still a great challenge. And similar, like you said, when you go from device to device, because some of the classic way of thinking about security is like, does this come from a user or not? Can a user manipulate this? And when you break things down and you got multiple hops, it makes it a lot harder to assess. So that's still in the category of like problems being solved. And I think in terms of whether you do too much different from mobile or not, I don't really think so. I mean, there's not really even mobile don't have a bandwidth limit these days. So right. You certainly wouldn't want to have a soft spot because you assume it's only going to be like powerless mobile devices that attack you or something. So I think you have to apply the principles pretty equally.
All right.
One thing to remember though on mobile, that when people ask about security mobile, there is one part that is installed on my device, but that's not the heart of it. That's just one side. If something happens, they can hack to my device. If something is happening in the back end, then everything is at risk, right? So mobile, there is a client side and there is a web service in the back. And people need to remember when they need to scan their mobile infrastructure, mobile application, whatever they want to call it, the back end is critically important, if not more. And it may expose APIs that are not even used by the mobile just because the developer thought it may be used later. So critical there.
Good point. Good point. We actually got a comment from Sylvain, who said that API and cloud are dramatically enlarging the surface of the attack, indeed. And then Robbie agreed and said, I'd even argue that cloud native technology like containers, Terraform, Kubernetes are moving to what used to be infrastructure secured by IT ops security into the application, which widens the scope of appsec further. So, definitely the conversation around, cloud native and other kind of technologies that are really having an impact on the application development space in general. Are they kind of changing the face of application security and the way organizations need to approach it? Ravi, what do you think?
Well, as I wrote, I definitely agree with that statement that I just said. In the chat, I think the main thing there is these things used to be secured in a different way. Like at least appsec, the code you were writing, and maybe some of the third-party code you leveraged was always kind of a function of appsec. So if developers or whoever was involved, like they were always somewhat aware of that, and there's progression happening there. But on some of these other technologies, it's really replacing the team that was securing your boxes in your data center, or even in sort of cloud version 1 where you've got VMs and they're fairly persistent and you're still patching the OS and doing things like that. These are now files that are living in the repository and the developers are touching them. And so and they are their own way in. In fact, some of them, some folks believe that the biggest vulnerabilities they're going to have are going to be misconfigured configurations or misconfigured cloud setup through Terraform. That widens the scope of again, what is application security and what the developers need to be aware of as well. And so I think that's coming on, just when we're trying to get to one test to rule them all, we're actually widening this of what you need to consider your application.
So, gosh, I can't believe it. We're a quarter to the top of the hour. We only have about 15 minutes left in our conversation, but I kind of want to kind of bring up the idea that we're talking about application security a lot, but we haven't really talked too much about compliance and what role that plays in application security, especially as organizations are, how they approach security. It seems like there are a number of companies that think about it more as they're just kind of checking off a box, on their compliance checklist. So, how can we kind of move beyond this kind of, security as an afterthought / compliance issue into this kind of this security first mindset that organizations really, really need to be taking when it comes to their code? How can we change the minds? How can we change the perception? How can we move an entire industry? How can we move the Titanic?
I'll just say,
into the Suez
I think
Canal?
it's rapidly becoming a self-correcting problem. Like there's a reason to be secure. It's not, just for the sake of it. And that the attackers are also learning what is the greatest leverage. Like people aren't interested in email addresses anymore, lists of email addresses, barely even credit cards. They're interested in, for example, a health company leaking health records and how much they're willing to pay to pretend that leak is now a confidentially white hat disclosed leak and things like that. So companies are learning pretty fast that there's a reason to be secure, and the hackers are kind of helping them learn that. So
do you think that this is still kind of a major issue with organizations? I mean, yeah, to your point, Reese, it's self-correcting, but are we moving as fast as we really should be?
No.
It's still a concern.
Yeah,
it's definitely still a concern. And Felix wrote something that I completely agree. When I learned computer science, no one taught me anything about security. They told you about, buffer overflow to some degree. Don't use the index beyond what you have. No one explained to me, if you have buffer overflow, this might happen actually. All the information about security, I feel, is still not being taught in the academy. And this is probably where we need to start, where people need to start training them, not training them in the academy. They need to come out of the academy knowing that, they need to sanitize their input validation. 20 years into the process, and SQL injection is still out there, and cross-site scripting is still out there. It's not that hard to get rid of it. People just need to know what it means and how to get rid of it, and boom, it will be gone.
I think that's a really good point, Eitan. Both that hitting everywhere that you are learning your development skills. So yes, in school, and maybe over time, that's not even the place most people are going to learn software development. So in your online classes or in the workforce as well. I do think the more tech savvy companies, at least from what I've seen, are starting to get to a place where delivering secure code or secure applications is becoming more like delivering a good quality application. It's not all the way there, but it's starting to make that progress. And so it's possible that as that becomes the thing, developers maybe aspire to, that it widens out, right? If it matters at Google and Twitter and whatever today, then how long before it matters at the next place? Then how long do you teach it everywhere? But there's also cultural things, security champion programs, which various companies try to implement, and reminds me a little of some of the other champion programs like privacy and all these things. But that's another case. So if you're already there and you've already got your team and you can't, go hire some new kids from school that just learn security, what do you do with them? Putting in security education programs as well, I think is coming in. So while I agree, I don't think we're there now. I do see if the puck is going to go where the leaders in tech are today, it seems like the puck is going there.
And an interesting thing is that the vendors, us including, but not only, I think it's Nick, I saw something, I'm almost sure that Whitesource also, we have free tools for people to use.
Yeah.
And they're very easy. You go to the marketplace for your IDE or GitHub and you get it. And you start using it and you cut your low-hanging fruits, you get rid of them. It's so easy. You have to go this is an ask for everyone that is listening to this. Whether you use our tool or someone else, just go and start fixing and start looking at it and care enough to install the plugin and start using it, because our information is in your hands also.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously.
And it's on us to make that really accessible too, right? Not only having a free product is part of it, making sure that you're providing content and training on the product in a way that's developer friendly is going to be really important as well. Because if it's just the application security person, the two in the company of 1,000, right? Right. They can be great, but they're not going to solve the problem.
So Scott, as the Chief Security Officer, what are you hearing from your customers as far as the type of talent that they're bringing into their organization? Are they recognizing that their application developers aren't necessarily that well versed on security, or are they becoming more more security savvy, if you will, or more security first in their mindsets?
Yeah, sure. I think this is all. So I have a big piece of most of my presentations that talk about this whole let's teach developers AppSec, but let's not teach AppSec how to be developers. So somehow security is getting a pass on this whole thing, but development doesn't operate singularly. They operate in teams, and they kind of make team decisions and do code review stuff and stuff like that. And I think oftentimes security teams make it tough or don't help facilitate this, go use a free tool, because it will help you understand that. The hardest part of teaching someone about application security is doing it in context of stuff they work on every day, instead of as much as I love them, the vulnerable apps that are out there that have nothing to do with anything they're building ever, and they aren't even built like how you build applications. So being able to go, run a DAST tool against the thing that you're working on and see a SQL injection, and then be able to go, I'm going to step through how this attack actually works in my code. And then if they get stuck going, okay, now I need an AppSec person, or I need to go consult somebody else, a senior dev who might understand this a little bit more. Most of the people that I talk to, prospects, are worried about the people that are coming in afterwards, to be able to get them up to speed and have the same guardrails for the whole team, as opposed to just a seasoned person, a seasoned application developer, so that they can go fast and not go flying off the track and kill a bunch of spectators because the safety measures aren't there. But as security people, we just need to facilitate that more. We have this inherent security person, oh my gosh, what is this tool? What is it doing? Why is it taking all my info? But that's not helping our development teams.
Interesting. Okay, so we've about 8 minutes until the top of the hour. So I want to just kind of do a closing question to you guys, which is, how can we make application security better for everybody? For the users, for the developers, for the security teams? What do we need to do? Ravi, I'm going to start with you.
Well, it won't be surprising from someone from Sneak, but we've got to make application security more of a developer-first approach, both in process and the way we construct the tools and the way we construct the information. That is the only way this is going to scale as we continue to move down this path of digital transformation and the need to deliver more and more code faster. So for me, that's the number one factor.
Eitan.
I'll let.
Oh, sorry.
Eitan, go ahead.
Sure. To add to what Ravi mentioned, just query for Scott. Yes, application security team don't need to learn how to code. I mean, it doesn't work. No harm in that, but they need to learn how to empathize with the developer, because as we said earlier, the developer is pressured to release something on time, and they don't care about security as much as all of us would want to. So we need to, it's not tools, it's mind shift. Tools will always have deficiencies and advantages. People need to care. It needs to come from the leadership, but also at the same time, the bottoms up, where with the free tools that are out there, that gives great experience, and that's the most important thing. It's okay sometimes to not find everything, as long as you find things that people can fix and act upon, and you deliver it in a way that they can do it. So more sessions like this, if you can reach out to more people and have them try out tools, whatever, that can help.
Yeah, thanks. What you said just at the end was pretty much what I wanted to add on top. It's that we don't have a shortage of problems. Like we already identify many problems. We can always get more, but the shortage is really in the prioritization and the remediation of it. Like we need to get people with their heads back above water by helping them rule out the ones that don't need immediate addressing. You know, if everything's high priority, nothing's high priority, right? So I think prioritization and then automated remediation so that people don't have to be excuse me, people don't have to be an expert in every single aspect. Like let's automate it where we can.
Yeah, I think everything Ravi and Eitan and Reese said, it's all awesome stuff, and I totally agree with it. I think most of the people watching today are IT and security professionals. So the number one thing that I always tell my people in an organization, whether they're new or they've been there a long time, is how much time have you spent with a development team listening? Go listen, go sit in their stand-ups, go sit in their scrums for a month. Do nothing, just listen. And listen to the problems that they're trying to tackle and the pressures that they're facing. This is all that empathy thing. And then become a partner with them. Like become part of their solution to do stuff faster with higher quality, as opposed to some of that checkboxy stuff, which is like, it has to have a blah, it has to have a blah, and I don't care about this development team or what their other priorities are. It has to work that way. You have to be able to partner so that you can all trust each other and make good decisions and have great outcomes, as opposed to just ticket chucking in Jira or in ThreadFix or wherever you're putting all these tickets that no one's eventually going to work on.
All right. All right. Well, those are some great insight, and gosh, I do appreciate everybody's input on this, and especially the audience. We've had some great comments come in from the audience, but I do want to thank you guys for a great conversation. Any parting thoughts? Any closing comments that anybody would like to make before I close things out?
I think earlier when I said it's not a responsibility, it's the responsibility of the security. Being a product manager, it's supposed to be my responsibility also. Now, for us, it's easy. All of our developers understand security, so they know to care about it. I don't need to put it as a requirement like I do for quality. It should be a requirement from product manager. Hey, where is your quality testing? I need the quality tool, and I need a secure tool. And it needs to come also from product managers out there that are not as lucky as us as working with developers that actually know security.
Excellent. Anything else from anybody?
Say people are rational, so incentivize security.
All right. All right, great. All right, well, listen, I do want to thank all four of you guys for being just excellent panelists. I had such a great time having this, moderating this discussion with you all, and I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. So thank you to all four of you, Ravi, Eitan, Reese, and Scott. Good stuff all the way around. And I also want to thank the audience for being a huge part of the conversation as well. So thank you for that. Just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you want to watch it again, or if you missed any or all of it, you will have the opportunity to watch it later on. We will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. Again, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Before we close things out, I do want to do the drawing for the $425 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to that. Everybody cross your fingers twice. Here we go. Our winners today. First one is Scott B. Congratulations, Scott. So you were so close. Scott.
close.
I almost thought it was me.
Oh, sorry.
If you say Reese, I'm getting excited.
That's right. Second winner today is Aaron P. Congratulations, Aaron. or Arun, I think it is. I apologize for that. Okay, third winner today is Frank K. Congratulations, Frank. And our fourth winner today is Rob H. Congratulations, Rob. We'll be following up with all four of you offline via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. If you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. All right. As I said before, guys, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. It's always a pleasure to see you all and have the discussions. And I hope we can do it again very soon.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlene.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This has been so much fun. But this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.